Hey guys, into the end here. A new patch was just announced today, I believe. At least it's the very first time I saw it, and I thought I would do another quick video and comments on how I feel about the patch notes. I've done one of these before. I'm not quite sure if this is something I will continue to do, but I have some thoughts about the changes, so I wanted to share with you guys. So first of all, I'm only going to focus on the patch notes. In terms of the draft and card changes, and not so much the technical and UI and interface changes and game optimization changes. I think those are just all positive. There's nothing really to say about that. It's great that they're fixing bugs. It's great they're trying to make the connections more stable. So all of those are just positives. There's not much to talk about other than the fact that it's good. So I think here is where people are going to be a lot more diverse in their opinions. So let's just go down. Let's just go down the past changes here. So the first things first. Let me see if I can make this bigger so that it's easier to see on screen. That's pretty good, I think. So the first thing, and I think this is actually the single biggest change in my book, because the drafting format is something that has frustrated a lot of players and have really made people angry over the last month or so, 2 months since the Dusk Road came out. And I think a lot of people have already voiced all the reasons for why they think the drafting format is bad. People are saying that there's a lack of removal spells, green is too strong, there's decks don't come together, it's messy. But I think Direwolf Digital has come up with a very, very smart and creative way to solve the problem. And I think it really shows their deep understanding of what's wrong with the drafting format, and I really, really agree with this change. So all they're doing is, rather than going Dusk Road pack and then the earlier two sets, and then the fourth pack being the Dusk Road pack, they're making the first and third pack from Dusk Road. And what that really means is that those packs will be passed to you from the same direction. That means the same player who passed you all the packs in pack 1, round 1, is the same player who's going to pass you all the Dusk Road packs on the third pack. And there is a lot of significance to this. What that really means is that whatever signal that you've received from this player on pack 1, it's going to be the same signals and it's going to be the same trends on pack 3. If you knew that a specific color is definitely open at the end of pack 1, you can be very confident that the same colors will be open in pack 3. Now, what exactly was previously, because the fourth pack is Dusk Road and it comes from the other direction, so the player who passed you the Omens pack on pack 2 is the person who passed you the fourth Dusk Road pack. That is where problems begin, because whatever signal you saw for Dusk Road in pack 1, you're not getting the same signals and not getting the same trends. Whatever color that was open on pack 1 is likely not going to be the same colors that are open on pack 4. That is inherently, I think, the biggest problem with the drafting format. Not I've complained about the fact that Omens was a kind of a pointless set in the drafting format, because only one set means that all of the Omens mechanics are never realized. That's actually a smaller problem. So what this really means for the future of draft is that people's decks are going to be a lot better. And I think one of the biggest problems that people have with the current drafting format, whether or not they're able to articulate it properly, is really just a feeling of frustration when you draft this set, and by the fourth pack, all your plans and all your strategies and your synergies that you planned out on pack 1 never came together, because the guy who passed you pack 4 is a different person, and all the things that you thought were open, or it seemed open on the first pack, were not there in the fourth pack. And as a result of that, people's drafts never come together. Anybody who drafts the mechanics of Bond and Gunslingers, etc., etc., the strategies never come together unless you got lucky. And that's the frustration. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't, and your whole game plan falls apart by the fourth pack, and all you feel is is frustration, and you're left with a deck that is all over the place and it doesn't do anything. And I think being forced to play with a crappy deck like that you read all the right signals, you picked all the best picks you could, you were smart about it, your skills have really allows you to identify the proper colors in the first pack. None of that matters, because when the fourth pack comes around, your deck falls apart, and in pack 1 you drafted all the gunslingers, but by pack 4 there are no gunslingers left, and you're drafting a bunch of sentinels. So then you have a half sentinel deck and half gunslingers deck, and it sucks, and you lose, and it's frustrating, right? And of course, all the opponent that you play with are facing the same problem you are. So sometimes you win these games with a terrible deck because your opponent's deck fell apart even worse than yours. And then you feel terrible because the games are kind of stupid. And you feel like you're being rewarded for a draft that didn't come together. So there's a disconnect between effort, skill, and reward. And then you sometimes run into opponents where they got lucky and everything fell in place for them, and they have just the most amazing Gunslingers deck or Bond deck or Dinosaurs deck that makes you go, what the hell? Nothing I could have done during the draft would have made me beat this deck, because just by pure variance and chance on the 4th pack, none of the strategies that I was looking to do came back around. And then that further adds to the frustration of the player, and that's why I think that's the real reason why everyone's complaining. It's the frustration and the feeling of, and the demotivation, and people start to feel disengaged, and people feel disappointed because they feel that their skill doesn't directly translate into their success. And of course, people who are ambitious are being forced to play with really bad decks that fall apart in the 4th pack when the player didn't do anything wrong. And I think that is the biggest problem of the current drafting format. And I think this may do it. I have a really good feeling that this may fix that problem, or at least alleviate it to a pretty significant degree. So I love this change. This is possibly the best change, and it may even convince me to go back into drafting. As you know, if for those of you who follow my videos, I hit Masters and draft every single month I play this game, except for January. I just gave up. I've done, I think, 3 or 4 videos for draft, got myself halfway through Diamond, and I just stopped playing. And I haven't played for a couple of weeks. And usually drafting is one of my primary motivations for playing the game. I think this could convince me to start doing more draft videos. So we'll see how that pans out, but I have a very good feeling about this. So let's go down the list here. Card changes aimed at draft. I don't actually think the Valkyrie Arcanist and the Emerald Spear is at all impactful in the majority of the games that we play. So I don't see this having any material impact on the outcome of a draft. Frontier Confessor, though, is really good. Having an earlier game silence effect that is a smaller body, I think this is a good way to go. A 3/4 is actually a little bit too powerful, in my opinion, and a 5 drops silence is often too slow against the decks that likes to fly over top of you, mainly the Justice decks. And making this a 4 drop helps fight against those kind of strategies to reduce their power level, but making it a smaller unit also makes it a little harder for you to clump up the ground and get into these very common board stalls that typically happens in today's drafting format. The board stalls happen from various reasons. One, a lot of bodies that are between 3 and 4 power and toughness, but on top of that, it's because nobody's decks come together. Everybody's decks fall apart by the 4th pack, so nobody has any kind of cohesive strategy that works. So everyone's just casting random units that clog up the ground and nobody can attack. And I think that is already going to be sort of mitigated by the first change, and this change with the Frontier Confessor will further help alleviate that. And they were right. The Justice-based decks were far too powerful. And one of the things that they didn't do anything about is the fact that Justice is the only color with a very, very good common slot removal spell. And that's going to continue to make Justice a very attractive drafting option. So that didn't get touched on, but I think that might be okay if you consider this first change. The clearing of the rules of Maiden and Steward of the Past, I mean, they came right out and told you that this is basically a kind of a rule interaction complexity problem. This may be a back-end coding issue as well. So it's not really a balance change. I mean, the balance got changed, but it's not the motivation for the change. So there's not much to talk about there. All I can say is that Void focused strategies has all of a sudden gotten a lot better because the number of decks that would run the Maiden is very small, whereas the number of decks that used to run Steward of the Past is very high. And now its power level is significantly reduced, And I think we're going to see a resurgence of Void decks, especially the Echo Revenge type of decks, because one of the key cards also got buffed, as we will see later on down the patch notes. So that's all I have to say about that. So keep an eye open for changes in the metagame, and expect a resurgence of Void recursion, like Reanimators with Vera, for example, or Echo Revenge type of strategy. I expect to see more of it, I think. Individual card changes here. So for Dawnwalker, I think this is a perfectly valid change. Dawnwalkers are ridiculously powerful. Forcing it to be more of a mono time-based card or making it harder to cast, I think is good. At the same time, I fear maybe a slight reduction and a limit on the diversity of deck types now that you can't run Dawnwalker in some 3-color base decks or even 2-color decks that you may sometimes have trouble casting it. So I think, but considering the power level of Dawnwalker, I think that's justified. So I'm neutral about this change. These changes I find highly irrelevant. I mean, at least in Pathfinders. So for the Echo Revenge decks that looks to get to basically exploit the Echo Revenge mechanic, it'll be a little bit harder to cast a Pathfinder because it's now 2 faction requirements. So those 4-color based decks that Crown Echo Revenge or the Rise to the Challenge Echo Revenge decks that I like, it's going to be a little bit harder to cast, but I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal because those decks have a lot of color fixing, and they don't have very strong influence requirements in the other colors anyway. So I think these changes are not too relevant. So Withering Witch now only hits undamaged enemies. I think this is probably mostly just due to the fact that Withering Witch is one of the few cards in this entire game that has a super unique effect. You can play Lightning Storm first, and then you play the Withering Witch, and what it does is it sets and augments the card's health and toughness so that it becomes 1 after all other effects are considered. So if you Lightning Storm someone for 2 damage, the Withering Witch will always augment whatever layers of effects and buffs and obelisks and whatever they have, to set the unit health to show 1 on the actual corner of the card on the table, and the 2 damage from the Lightning Storm will always kill it. So it's a really counterintuitive and very weird interaction. It's super unique, and I think they're just trying to clarify that to make it less confusing for newer players. A Black Sky Harbinger being a 4/5, you can argue that this is a nerf. I think, to me, it's kind of I'm pretty much neutral. I think a 4/5 and a 3/5 isn't that big of a difference, especially when you're evasive and flying in air. There isn't very many 4 health flying units that you're trying to get through with your 3/5, other than the owls from Combray, from Great Parliament. And the fact that it's a 4/5 also opens up the Black Sky Harbinger to removal spells, like Vanquish, which previously it dodges. Black Sky Harbinger dodges a lot of removal. It dodges Annihilate and Vanquish, which are the 2 by far most common conditional removal spells. Nobody plays Suffocate, or very few people play Suffocate. So having 3 power, dying to Suffocate isn't that big of a deal. But 4/5 means that it dies to one of the most common removal spells. I think Vanquish is probably the most common removal spell in Justice, more so than Harsh Rule. So now they die a little easier, so I think you gain something and you lose something. So overall, I think it's kind of a wash. I feel neutral about this change. Devastating Setback being cheaper to cast is absolutely amazing. There is an archetype out there in Magic that has never fully translated to Eternal. Obviously, it's 2 different games, but the archetypes in general do overlap quite a bit. And that is a highly disruptive tempo-based or even disruptive control-based deck. And it's always a black or shadow card. Cards like Sabotage and Devastating Setback to disrupt the opponent's game plan. And I think Devastating Setback was just too expensive. For the cast, it's just not worth it. And it's also too slow to achieve the goal of slowing down aggro decks. So this change is very welcome, and it's going to increase the strength of that style of a deck that likes to disrupt your opponent early on through hand disruption. So I think there is a window for these decks to to emerge from the metagame. These are just straight up buffs. Obviously, no, almost nobody plays Tarkov, or even in unseen decks, Alu is often very underwhelming. So I think these are just much needed buffs to make these cards possibly start to see some play. But to be honest, I still don't think Tarkov is going to see any play, and it is yet to be seen whether or not a dedicated unseen deck is any good. Changes to Argent-Port Instigator, I think, is perfectly justified. It is, I think, way too powerful of a 2-drop. This card does a ridiculous amount of damage, and it's too easy for fire-based decks to splash this, which just makes the fire-based decks very, very oppressive. So I think this is going to do a very, very good job in slowing down some of the fire-based decks, and even reduce the number of them in the metagame, which I think a lot of players find frustrating to fight, because you have best of 1 games, you don't have an option to sideboard after game 1. So you either have answers for these all-in aggro decks in Stone Scar, you either have answers and draw them and win, or you don't and you lose. There's not really like a lot of opportunity to outsmart your opponent or outplay your opponent. There's not a lot of opportunities for a good skill decision making. It's just, did I draw the Plague in time, and he just or the Lightning Storm in time, and he loses and he concedes, or do I not draw the Lightning Storm and I concede on turn 4 or 5, or just die to damage? So there's not a lot of interaction in that sense. So I think this is one step towards the right direction. The aggro decks like Stone Scar in other games are much easier to deal with, because you can fill your sideboard with hate cards specifically against that matchup. But best of 1 games, it's kind of a lottery. You run into it and you don't have answers, you might as well just you might as well just concede. So anyway, I think that's a good change. Stone Powder Alchemist is now cheaper to cast, which I love. I've always loved Stone Powder Alchemist as a card, and I even have a deck really built around it to abuse the Revenge and the Life Gain trigger, the damage trigger that it comes into play. For those of you who like to play with Echo Revenge but don't want to use Macdo, I have a version that pretty much just relies on Stone Powder Alchemist. So I love this change. This is great. And there's a bunch of card changes that I don't think is too relevant. I think most of these are just buffs, and really none of these cards are relevant at all in the metagame. So buffing a bunch of cards that nobody uses, maybe they start to see a little bit more play. But the buff to Gear Master maybe opens the door to a slightly better archetype with Sentinels, but I doubt it. So I think most of these are fairly irrelevant. I think they may have more implication in draft than they do in constructed. So anyway, so I kind of flip-flopped, talked about drafting format a little bit, implications to changes to the drafting format, and then when it comes to the card changes, I focus primarily on constructed and ranked play, and not so much on draft, because a lot of these cards are rares or legendaries, so the odds are you're not going to be playing with these in draft anyway. So naturally, I switched topic to talk about a ranked and constructed play. So yeah, those are my thoughts to the new changes. As always, I highly encourage everyone to wait and see, play with the new changes for a couple of weeks, and then we'll come back and revisit to see how things have settled. I try my best not to get too upset or too overly passionate over changes, because you really don't know how things will shake up until you actually see it shake up. If you go further down to the comment section, people are so angry and everybody is so unhappy. They just full of hate and rage as soon as they hear something announced. And so all I want to say is just let it run its course for a couple of weeks to a month. Let it go to whenever there's change, you let it come back down to a stabilized state before you re-evaluate the situation. And so right now, based on what I see, I'm cautiously hopeful that things gets better. So those are my opinions. If you agree or not agree with me, please leave a comment below. If you have any other thoughts, or if I said anything that you don't agree with, I would love to have that dialogue and discussion with you. Leave it in the comments. We can chat about the changes. If I miss anything, or if I said anything that you don't that is just straight up wrong, correct me. I make mistakes all the time. So yeah, as always, thank you for watching. I'm not sure how much more I'll do these kind of videos where I talk about patch changes, but if you guys find it helpful, if you enjoy this content, let me know that as well, and that will help me make a decision next time on whether or not to spend time to do more of these kind of content. All right? Thank you.